A single kiss, a whispered secret, and suddenly, nothing between us could ever be the same. I still remember the way the front door opened that afternoon. I was there to see my friend, just another weekend visit, nothing unusual, nothing I hadn't done a dozen times before. But the moment the door swung open, everything about the evening shifted. It wasn't my friend standing there. It was his sister. I'd met her briefly in passing years ago, but time has a way of reshaping memories. Now, standing in the doorway, she looked nothing like the faint recollection I carried in my mind. She was taller than I remembered, her posture straight and effortless, as though the world around her moved at her pace. Her hair framed her face in gentle waves, with a few strands tucked behind one ear, and there was this calm steadiness in her expression, the kind of poise that only comes with time, experience, and a quiet confidence that doesn't need to announce itself. "Hi," she said warmly, her voice low and even. "You must be here for Daniel." I nodded, suddenly aware of how casual I must have looked in my hoodie and sneakers. "Yeah. I'm just a little early." She smiled, just a small curve of her lips, but something about it lingered. She opened the door wider and stepped aside, the faint scent of coffee and vanilla following her as I stepped inside. Her hand brushed mine briefly as she took my jacket to hang it up. It was such a small thing, skin against skin for only a second, but the warmth of her touch stayed with me, as if my nerves had memorized it. The house felt lived in, books stacked along the coffee table, a soft throw blanket folded over the couch, and the faint hum of a kettle cooling in the kitchen. The kind of home where silence felt comfortable, not empty. As I followed her toward the living room, I caught myself noticing details I had no business noticing. The graceful way she moved, the way her sweater hung just loosely enough to give her an air of casual elegance, the slight frown in her brow when she thought. She turned to me suddenly, catching me off guard. "He'll be down in a minute," she said, tucking that same strand of hair back behind her ear. "He always takes forever when he knows someone's waiting." Her tone was teasing, fond, but the look she gave me held something else, something I couldn't place yet. I smiled back, though I felt strangely unsteady, as though I'd walked into a conversation I hadn't prepared for. And then she offered me tea, her hand gesturing lightly toward the kitchen. I noticed again the faint tremor of warmth when her fingers brushed against mine as she handed me the cup. It was almost nothing, almost. By the time my friend finally appeared, cheerful and oblivious, I had already realized something quietly unsettling. This visit wasn't going to feel like the others. Because his sister, with her calm presence and steady eyes, had already left an impression I couldn't shake, the evening stretched on more easily than I expected. My friend was around for most of it, laughing, talking, keeping the air filled with noise. But then, as it always seems to happen, a moment slipped in quietly, one where the noise fell away and it was just her and me. Daniel had stepped out to grab something from the store, promising he'd be 10 minutes tops. That left the two of us in the living room, the kind of silence that can either be heavy or oddly comfortable settling between us. She was sitting at the far end of the couch at first, legs tucked neatly beneath her, flipping absently through a magazine. I tried to focus on my phone, scrolling for the sake of pretending I had somewhere else to put my attention. But I couldn't help noticing how she shifted slightly, setting the magazine aside and leaning a little closer, as though the invisible line between us wasn't all that important. "You read much?" she asked, nodding toward the shelf stacked with novels behind me. "Sometimes," I said, glancing back at the titles. "Mostly when I can't sleep." "You?" Her lips curved into a quiet smile. "I used to. Now I just buy books faster than I can finish them." I laughed, and the sound seemed to loosen something in both of us. She leaned in, reaching for a book to show me. Her arm brushed against mine as she pulled it from the shelf, a small, unintentional touch, though it didn't feel unintentional to me. My skin burned faintly where we'd connected, a kind of warmth that lingered long after her hand had drawn back. We started talking about movies, music, little things. She had this way of listening that made even my clumsy sentences feel like they carried weight. Her eyes softened when I spoke, and sometimes, When she laughed, she touched my arm lightly, like she was anchoring the moment. I found myself watching her mouth when she smiled. I tried not to, but I noticed. The way her lips curved, the faint line at the corner when her expression lingered just a little too long, it all drew me in without permission. The cushion between us seemed smaller now. She shifted closer, not by much, just enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her. My heartbeat picked up in ways I hoped weren't visible. At one point, she reached across me to grab her phone from the coffee table. The movement brought her shoulder against mine, her sleeve brushing softly against my arm. I caught a faint trace of her perfume, subtle, floral, the kind that doesn't announce itself but waits for you to notice. She murmured a quick, sorry, with a smile, but I didn't mind. I didn't want her to move. When Daniel finally returned, jingling his keys like nothing had shifted in his absence, we both leaned back slightly, as though caught leaning too close to the flame. But the air still hummed with the trace of it, the laughter, the touches, the closeness that didn't feel accidental at all. And I knew, as I sat there, that something had quietly begun between us, something small, fragile, but impossible to ignore. The night seemed to slow as the hours wore on. Daniel had gone upstairs, already half asleep after a long day, leaving the two of us downstairs in the quiet living room. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the ticking of the clock on the wall were the only sounds, filling the silence with a kind of intimacy neither of us mentioned aloud. She was sitting across from me at first, her legs tucked gracefully to the side, cradling a glass of wine. I watched her swirl it absent-mindedly, her gaze lost in the crimson liquid as though her thoughts were far away. Then her eyes lifted to mine, catching me watching her. She didn't look away immediately, and that pause was all it took to change the air between us. "You're quiet," she said softly, almost teasing, though her voice carried something else beneath it. "I'm just listening," I admitted, my voice low. Her smile was faint, almost hesitant, but her eyes didn't let go of mine. She leaned back slightly, setting the glass down on the table, her fingers tapping once against the rim before retreating into her lap. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, charged, like the stillness before a storm. I could feel my pulse in my neck and my wrists, in every part of me that was aware of how close she was. My gaze flickered, from her eyes, to her mouth, and back again. I didn't mean to let it linger there, but she noticed. I could tell she noticed. She shifted, leaning toward me just a fraction, as though testing the distance. My breath caught. I didn't move. I couldn't. Her hand came to rest lightly on my knee. Not a firm grip, not even really a touch, just the faintest weight of her palm, enough to set every nerve in my body on edge. My chest tightened, and the silence between us deepened into something unspoken but undeniable. Then, almost without warning, she leaned closer. Her lips brushed against mine, feather-light, trembling, and impossibly brief. For a moment, I wasn't even sure it had happened, except for the way my body lit up, a rush of warmth spreading through me. Her mouth was soft, tentative, and gone before I could react. She pulled back sharply, her hands slipping away, her eyes wide as though she hadn't meant to, as though she couldn't believe she'd allowed herself that much. Her breath was unsteady, her gaze darting toward the floor, then back to me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought she could hear it. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. Her lips parted like she might explain, but no explanation came. Instead, she sat back, crossing her arms over her chest, as though building a wall as quickly as she had torn one down. The kiss was over in seconds. But the taste of it, the shock, the heat, the fragile sweetness of that fleeting moment, it stayed with me. And though she looked away, pretending to compose herself, I knew that neither of us would forget what had just happened. The kiss had barely ended when her voice broke the silence, low and urgent. "Don't tell him about this." Her words landed heavier than they sounded, pulling me back into the reality of where I was, who she was, and what had just happened. The warmth of her lips still lingered on mine, but her tone carried sharp edges, fear, guilt, and something else she couldn't quite hide. She stood abruptly, crossing her arms over her chest as though the gesture could erase what had happened between us. Her eyes avoided mine, fixed instead on the window where faint streaks of rain slid down the glass. "I mean it," she whispered, softer now. "He can't know." I swallowed hard, searching for words that didn't come easily. My mind was still spinning, not just from the kiss itself, but from the way she had pulled away, as if ashamed of what we'd shared. "I wasn't planning to," I managed finally, my voice steadier than I felt. Her shoulders eased a little, but she didn't turn around. She stayed near the window, her reflection faint in the glass, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The room felt heavier, the silence thicker. I wanted to close the distance between us, to tell her I hadn't misread that moment, that she hadn't either. But I could feel her walls going up, brick by brick. When she finally faced me again, her expression was guarded, careful. Yet her eyes betrayed her. There was a flicker there, of regret, yes, but also longing, the kind that lingers when you're trying to fight yourself. She walked past me, brushing against my shoulder as she went to gather the empty glasses from the table. The touch was brief, but deliberate enough that I felt the contradiction. She wanted distance, but she couldn't help reaching for some kind of connection. I sat there in silence, caught between frustration and understanding. Every movement she made seemed to echo with hesitation. She set the glasses in the sink a little too carefully, as though distracting herself with the mundane would undo what had already happened. When she returned, she kept her distance. She sat on the opposite end of the couch this time, her body angled away. But her hand betrayed her, fingers tapping lightly against her knee, restless, as if something inside her refused to settle. I wanted to reach across the space, to still her hand with mine, but I stayed where I was. Respecting the wall she was trying so desperately to rebuild, even as I sensed she wanted me to notice the cracks in it. That night, when I finally lay awake in the guest room, I couldn't stop replaying it, her whisper, her urgency, the way her lips had trembled against mine before she pulled away. She had said, "Don't tell him about this." But all I could think about was how much that tiny kiss already meant to me. And how impossible it was going to be to pretend it hadn't happened. The days that followed carried a strange weight. Outwardly, nothing had changed. I laughed with Daniel, we hung out like always, the easy rhythm of our friendship uninterrupted. But beneath the surface, every moment with her felt charged, fragile, on the edge of something unspoken. She kept her distance as best she could. Conversations were shorter, smiles more restrained. But even in her carefulness, she betrayed herself. I caught her watching me sometimes when she thought I wasn't looking, her eyes flicking away too quickly. When she passed me a glass or set a plate near me, her fingers brushed against mine a second longer than necessary. Tiny moments, impossible to ignore. And I couldn't keep pretending. Not after that night. Not after the kiss that had left me restless, replaying it in my mind until it was all I could think about. One evening, when Daniel went out to meet a friend, I found her in the kitchen. She was standing by the counter, wiping it down though it was already spotless, a small nervous habit, maybe, to keep her hands busy. "Hey," I said quietly, stepping closer. She glanced up, startled, then gave me a careful smile. "Oh. Hi. You want some tea?" Her voice was calm, polite, but I could see the tension in her posture, the way she avoided meeting my eyes for too long. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I don't want tea. I need to say something." That made her still. She set the cloth down, her hand lingering on it like she wasn't sure what else to do. Finally, she turned to face me, her expression guarded. I stepped closer, slowly, giving her every chance to step away. She didn't. "I can't keep pretending nothing happened," I said. My voice was steadier than I felt, but the words came from somewhere deeper than hesitation. "That kiss, it wasn't just a mistake to me. And I don't think it was to you either." Her breath caught. She looked down, her fingers twisting the edge of the cloth. "You don't understand," she whispered. It's complicated. Too many people could get hurt." I took another step forward, close enough now to feel the warmth of her presence. Slowly, I reached for her hand. She didn't pull away, though her fingers trembled slightly as mine closed around them. Then don't kiss me again, I said softly, my thumb brushing gently across her knuckles. Unless you mean it. Her head lifted at that, her eyes wide, searching my face as if she needed to be sure I wasn't just saying words. The silence stretched between us, thick with everything she couldn't bring herself to say. She didn't answer. Not with words. But she didn't let go of my hand either. Her grip tightened, just slightly, and in that small, fragile gesture, I heard her answer all the same. The storm rolled in just after sunset. At first, it was only a distant rumble, faint flashes on the horizon, but soon the rain came in sheets, drumming hard against the windows. The power flickered once, twice, then went out completely, leaving the house in sudden darkness. I fumbled for my phone, the pale glow of the screen lighting the room in faint blue. She laughed softly from the kitchen, her voice calm even in the dark. Don't worry, she said. Happens all the time around here. I've got candles. A few minutes later, the room glowed in warm, flickering light. Shadows danced along the walls, and the storm outside felt distant, muffled, like the world had folded in on itself and left just the two of us. She set one candle on the coffee table, another on the counter, then sank onto the couch with a sigh. Her hair caught the light, a soft halo around her face, and her expression carried something I hadn't seen before, tiredness, yes, but also relief, as though she could finally let herself breathe in the quiet. I joined her, sitting close but not too close, careful of the invisible line between us. For a while, we just listened to the storm. The rain tapping, the wind pushing at the windows, the occasional crack of thunder rolling through the night. It's been years, she said suddenly, her voice low, thoughtful, since I let myself sit like this. Just quiet. With someone. Her words hung in the air, heavier than the storm outside. I turned to look at her. She wasn't looking at me, though. Her eyes were fixed on the candle flame, her hands resting loosely in her lap. I hesitated, then slipped off my jacket and gently draped it over her shoulders. She startled slightly, glancing at me, her lips parting as though to protest. But she didn't. Instead, her hand lifted, holding the fabric in place, her fingers brushing briefly against mine. She let out a slow breath, softer now. You shouldn't be so kind, she murmured. It makes it harder to keep distance. I'm not trying to make it harder, I said. I just don't want you to be cold. That made her smile faintly, a smile that trembled at the edges, as though she were fighting something inside herself. After a moment, she shifted, leaning just slightly toward me. It was hesitant, tentative, but I opened the space for her without question. My arms slipped naturally around her, and she let her head rest against my chest. The weight of her was light but steady, and I could feel the quiet rhythm of her heartbeat through the thin layers of fabric. My own heart matched it, quickening at first, then finding a steadier pace, as though the two rhythms were learning to move together. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The candlelight flickered, the storm raged, and yet the silence between us was the calmest place I'd ever known. And in that closeness, her warmth against me, her breath rising and falling in sync with mine, I realized we'd crossed another line. Not with a kiss this time, but with something even harder to take back. The storm passed sometime in the early hours. I must have drifted off, because when I opened my eyes the house was hushed, bathed in the pale light of morning. She was still leaning against me, her head on my chest, her breathing soft and steady. For a moment I stayed perfectly still, not wanting to disturb her. The quiet felt fragile, like glass that could shatter with the wrong movement. My arm was still around her shoulders, and I could feel the faint warmth of her body pressed against mine. The memory of the night before, the storm, the candlelight, the closeness, filled me with a strange mix of peace and restlessness. Eventually, her eyes fluttered open. She blinked slowly, adjusting to the morning light, and then looked up at me. For a second, there was no mask, no guarded expression, just her, unshielded and human. "Morning," I whispered. Her lips curved faintly. Morning. She sat up, smoothing her hair, as though suddenly aware of how intimate the moment was. But when she looked at me again, something in her gaze had changed. The walls she'd built so carefully weren't as solid anymore. I can't keep doing this, she said softly, almost to herself. A flicker of panic stirred in me, but then she reached out, her fingers brushing lightly over the back of my hand. I don't want to hide anymore, she added, her voice steadier now. The words hung there, heavy and freeing at once. I turned my hand over, threading my fingers through hers. Her grip tightened, hesitant at first, then firmer, like she'd been holding back for too long. You don't have to, I said quietly. Whatever happens, whatever it costs, I'd rather be honest than pretend this isn't real. Her eyes softened, the tension in her shoulders easing. For a long moment, she just looked at me, like she was memorizing the certainty in my expression. Then, slowly, she nodded. We didn't make a grand promise, or speak of the future in dramatic terms. It was simpler than that, two people deciding, in the quiet light of dawn, that the truth of what they felt was worth the risk. Later, when the sun rose higher, we stepped outside into the garden. The rain had washed everything clean, leaves glistening with droplets, the air cool and fresh. She walked beside me, her hands still in mine. At first, her fingers trembled slightly, as if she expected me to let go at any moment. But when I didn't, when I held her hand with steady certainty, I felt the tension leave her. A small smile touched her lips, the kind of smile that doesn't need words, because it already says everything. We walked slowly, not needing to rush. The world was quiet, the storm behind us, the morning ahead. And for the first time since that first fleeting kiss, I felt no hesitation. Whatever came next, we would face it together. 11.